searching for whatever's the cheapest school that's easy to get into. Fake students also pick programs that they think sound good to a visa officer, even if it's not something that they're interested in. So if an officer asks you, oh, why did you pick this program? If you really are interested in the program, you can talk at length for why it makes sense with your life plan. But if you just pick a program you think sounds good, you're not able to do that. Same with only applying to one school. If you just want to get to the United States for some other reason rather than studying, then you're going to do it the easiest way possible. You're going to pick a community college. You're only going to apply to one school. So what should you do? What should a real student do? First of all, you have to figure out, like, what is your life plan? People don't invest years of their life and thousands and thousands of dollars just to like better themselves or for no reason. You have some place you want to get to in mind, right? You're at this place right now. You want to study this student visa program in order to get to some future goal you have. So start with that goal and start researching programs that will get you to that goal. That way in the future at the visa interview, you're able to talk about that fluently. Also, make sure you apply to multiple schools. This is something like normal students just do because it's very possible you're going to get denied admission to some of them. So you want to make sure that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And finally, make sure that you pick among your admits for reasons that you actually make sense to you. So if you pick a school only because you think it sounds good at a visa interview, the officer is going to sense that you don't actually care about it, or you're going to have to list fake reasons for picking it. So actually talk with your family, figure out what makes sense financially, geographically, et cetera, and make a decision based on that. So what does a fake student do when they're preparing their finances? A lot of times they don't have the finances. That's why they want to go and work in the United States. So their sponsor is maybe a friend or a distant relative. This a lot of times doesn't make sense to a visa officer. Like, why is your second cousin willing to spend $100,000 on your education? You better have a really good story for that, right? A lot of times also they'll ask somebody to just make a deposit in their account. Now, visa officers don't check documents often, but the thing that they're most likely to check is your bank statement. And if they see a very recent large deposit in there, they're going to wonder, where did this money come from? You know, the document isn't enough by itself. They want to know the story behind the money. Finally, a fake student might also create a fake loan letter. So what should you do? Number one, your sponsor needs to make sense. And I'm sure it does if you're a legitimate student. So if it's an immediate family member like your mother or your father, that makes sense. If it's somebody who's a more distant relative or just a friend, then you better be able to explain why that person is willing to do that for you. Also, make sure that the savings that you say your sponsor has match the income they have. So if your family, member makes $10,000 a year but has $200,000 in savings, that doesn't really make sense unless you're able to explain clearly where those savings actually came from. And then finally, if you do have a loan, just make sure that you know all the details of the loan, because they're trying to figure out, are you making up this loan? Did you just print out a fake loan letter? So they're going to ask you questions like, what is the interest rate? Is this collateralized? And you should be able to answer all those questions. All right, so what does a fake student do when preparing for the visa interview? They are going to search for what are the best visa interview answers. And here's the secret. There is no perfect visa interview answer, because if there was, somebody would post it online, everybody would use it around the world, and all of these fake students would get their student visa, right? That's why the best student visa answer isn't something you're going to find online. It is something true to you, something that only you have said in the history of all visa interviews. And visa officers are very good at kind of sensing that moment when they hear you say something like, oh, nobody could make that up. Nobody could find that online. This person is telling me the truth. And like I mentioned before, the student visa interview largely is a lie detector test. So when they hear that moment, they're going to trust you and they're going to issue your visa. Number two, a fake student is going to choose just random facts from the university website, because remember back in the beginning of the university selection process, they just searched cheap universities that are easy to get into. So when you ask them, hey, why are you going to this university? They're just going to quickly do some research on the university website, like it's accredited by the so-and-so association and the student to teacher ratio is good. And there's a lot of diversity, just things they read online that you can tell aren't actually true reasons for why they chose the program they did. They also memorize long paragraph answers, which is the number one reason I would say that students get refused the visa, is for memorizing answers. Because like I say, a visa officer is trying to figure out if you're fake or not. And if you're giving long paragraph answers, they can't figure that out because they can't sense the authenticity in your voice. This is why a lot of times when you read online about someone's visa experience, you think, oh, hey, everything they said looks so good. I don't understand why they were refused. The reason is the way they were saying it. And probably also what they were saying, the visa officer had already heard, 5 or 10 times that day from other people who had read the same thing online. And finally, a fake student might have an agent just fill out their entire visa application for them, and they won't know what's in the application. So when what they say at the interview does not match up with what's on their DS-160 visa application, then the officer is going to know that this person didn't actually even fill out their own application. So what should you do? Just make sure you talk about real reasons that you and your family chose for picking the university and the program you did. Officers can sense this, and they're going to know you're telling the truth. Rather than memorize the whole paragraph, you can prepare and kind of think about the reasons that you had for choosing your university, but think about them in bullet points. And when you're actually asked the question, take a moment and think about your life and create the answer as if it's for the first time. They're going to be able, because that's not something that fake students can do very well. So a visa officer is going to sense the authenticity in your voice and be more likely to approve your visa. You need to know everything about your family's finances. I know it's awkward to talk to your parents about how much money they make, how much money they have in savings. But a student visa really is to a large extent about your ability to pay for your education. And if you say, I don't know, when asked how much money do your parents make, that could lead to a denial. So make sure you know all about your parents' finances. Also, know what's in your DS-160 visa application so that what you say at the interview matches what's on there. Okay. When you're at the interview itself, what does a fake student do? First, because they memorized all these answers, they're not able to speak what we call off script, meaning, so visa officers know people memorize answers. It's not the end of the world if you start with a memorized answer, but they're going to try to move you into not giving memorized answers, what we call off script. So once they hear you reciting a memorized answer, they're probably going to try and dig a little deeper. So for example, oh, why are you going to this university? Answer, it is the #1 accredited university and the diversity is wonderful. And I've been studying with Professor XYZ, who's an expert. Oh, okay, thank you. But I'm just curious, like when you were talking with your family and you could have gone to the University of Arizona or the University of Arkansas, why did you pick Arkansas? And that's what them trying to get you to speak off script because they're trying to ask you something that they don't think you could have prepared for before. So if you've only memorized answers, you're not going to be able to kind of switch over and speak authentically. So don't memorize answers in the first place because you're going to feel overly reliant on them and not be flexible in the interview. A fake student also depends too much on documents because they know they're lying, right? So they don't want to talk. They kind of want to just show you documents and hope that will be enough. So if an officer asks, hey, how are you going to pay for this? Rather than explain their family's finances, they might just say, here's the bank statement and pass it over. These officers usually don't want to see documents because, like I said, they're too easy to fake. So make sure you answer verbally and then use the document to back it up if they ask you for it. Fake students also talk a lot about ties because they know that this is a concept visa officers think about. Do you have ties to your home country? But it's just too obvious in their case. They talk like, my parents are getting so old and I must get home to take care of them and my dog is in my home, so I must return at the end of my studies to care for my dog. It just sounds too fake. Yeah. And then, so what should you do? First of all, make sure you answer spontaneously, no memorized answers. Like I said, everything needs to kind of make sense. I'm here right now. I've just finished my bachelor's. I have 1 year of work experience and I need to do this master's in order to get this better job. Just be able to explain everything according to your life and it'll all tie together well. Also, you can bring documents. You should bring documents. Bring as many documents as you think they could possibly ask for because it doesn't hurt to bring it, even if they don't ask for it. But rather than rely on the document, just have it prepared and ready in case they ask for it. Or if you think it's very relevant and the document could explain something that you're unable to explain verbally, you can tell them you have it. For example, oh yeah, my father, he has this much money. I actually have the bank statement if you want to see it. And then they can say yes or no. But they're usually going to say no because people don't offer things that they don't actually have. So just the fact that you offer the document lets the officer know that it exists and then they're going to trust it more. And then just don't talk too obviously about ties. The truth is, our regulations, visa regulations state that young students do not need to demonstrate ties to their home country because you don't have any yet. You're too young. You don't have a job, you don't have a spouse, you don't have kids, so you don't have to worry too much about ties. It's more about convincing the visa officer that what you're doing makes sense and that you have a plan for some time in the future, returning to your home country or to some other country that's outside the United States. That's a credible plan. Okay, so what about OPT, CPT? Now, the truth is visa officers, even though OPT and CPT are 100% allowed under the regulations, visa officers get nervous about students who they think only want to work in the United States. This is an F1 student visa. It's meant for studies. OPT, it looks like a job, it sounds like a job, you get paid like a job, but technically it's training, right? It's training. It's part of your student experience. So if you're only talking about CPT or OPT as your main motivations for going to the United States, that's going to make an officer nervous that you don't really care so much about studying and all you want to do is go there to make money. Now, that being said, like I said, it's totally allowed under the regulations and visa officers know that it's something students are interested in doing it. I think that if you really want to do OPT, the best way to talk about it is kind of within a range of possible plans you have for after graduation. So, because remember, OPT is not a sure thing, right? It could get denied, you might not be able to find an opportunity in OPT. So I'm sure you have a plan B that involves departing the United States. So let the officer know that, yeah, OPT is something I'm interested in. It'd be great to get some, US experience. But if that falls through, then I could always go back and do, XYZ job in a company in my country. So just let them know that it's something you're considering, but among several options that you have. Okay, so what are some common weak points and how can you kind of explain them? One, a lot of people might have gaps in their education or work experience. Visa officers do want to see kind of progression in your life. And if they see, that you've been unemployed for 2 years, they're going to worry that you're desperate. Like you couldn't find a job in your home country. And so you need to go to the United States to work. So gaps can be a red flag. If you have gaps in your profile, you're going to want to explain to the officer what kinds of things you were doing during that time, whether it was professional development opportunities, maybe taking classes online. The other thing is visa officers are in a hurry. They have to do this interview in like 2 to 3 minutes. So a lot of times they don't have time to dig into month by month what you've been doing your whole life. So it could be possible where you could talk about your background without them even knowing you had gaps. So for example, if an officer asks, oh, hey, what's your background? Or, oh, what have you been doing since high school? You could quickly say, oh, yeah, so I did my 4 years of bachelor's and then I worked for a couple of years for this company. And more recently, I've been working for this company and now I want to do my master's. So maybe you had a 6-month gap somewhere in there. You don't have to mention that gap if you just list the things that you've been doing since high school, and they probably won't notice. But if they do, just make sure you explain what you were during that time to be productive rather than just, sitting in your parents' basement. If you have low grades, it's not the end of the world because you have been admitted to a university. The university wants you, and the visa officer is not kind of re-interviewing you for university admission. You already have your I-20. So the reason they ask this question about grades is because it just kind of gives them an idea into what kind of student you are, just to make sure you're the kind of applicant who would intend to continue studying. But if you have low grades, don't worry about it. I think a good way to do it is to either transition into some positive point you have, whether it's work experience or a good test score, or if you have nothing like that, then the best you might be able to do is explain why you think the university admitted you. So it might sound like this. Oh, what was your GPA? Answer. Oh, actually, I only, got a 2.7 GPA, but this university, I think, was really impressed with the internship I did, and they were really impressed with my essays. So you see how you could kind of transition into a strength and moving away from your low grades. If you are only applying to one school, you really have to have a good reason why that is the case. Maybe it's like near a relative and you want to be able to go visit them on the weekends. or this has this one very specific program that almost no other universities have in the United States. Or you went to a college fair and were just like really, had a good chemistry with the person you were talking to there, and you decided this is the school I want to go to. Whatever it is, you better have a really good reason, because it's outside of the normal process that students go through. Most students are going to apply to several schools, so have a good reason if you only picked one. Going to community college. Again, this could be a red flag just because it's something that fake students do, but it's also something that really smart students do, right? Because it's a lot less expensive. You can go for 2 years and then transition into a 4-year school. So if you're able to explain your longer term plan well, then I think this could actually be you could change it from a red flag into a positive point. So like, oh, you're going to a community college. Answer, yeah, if I do this, I could save about $20,000. And this community college has a relationship with this 4-year university where they guarantee admission if you have a certain GPA. So I'm interested in that 4-year program. So as long as you can explain longer term what your plan is, I think it could be okay. Relatives in the United States. So an officer cares about 3 main things with your family in the United States. So you should be able to explain all of these. 1, how did that person immigrate? They're looking at your family to try and figure out what you might do. So if your family member went and overstayed their tourist visa or claimed asylum, the officer is going to be worried that you're going to do the same thing. So they want to know the immigration story. 2, they want to know, does your relative have like some kind of business that you could go secretly work in? Like if your family member has a house painting business, they're going to worry maybe you want to go help them in their house painting business. And then 3, they want to know, how close is this family member to you? If it's your mom or your sibling, then it's starting to look, they're going to worry a little bit that you want to reunite with these family members. If it's a more distant relative, then it's not as concerning. So be prepared to explain the immigration story, your family member's business, and their exact relationship to you. And I know, like in a lot of cultures, you use the words brother very loosely. Like a brother could be your actual brother or a cousin or a friend. When you're at your visa interview, make sure you're very precise with your relationship terms, because an officer is going to get frustrated if they think your brother's there and then they find out later on it's actually just a friend of yours. Having a lack of prior travel, I think it's not actually a problem for students. If you have a lot of prior travel, it looks good for your case. But because you're young and this is kind of a special purpose of travel, you don't necessarily need to show a pattern of travel over time. It could indicate that your family is wealthy, but if your travel is not there, it's not necessarily a problem. Okay, here are some other just kind of random tips to keep in mind. Answers, they shouldn't be too short and they shouldn't be too long. If they're too short, remember I said this is a lie detector test? Visa officers can't get a sense from you on whether you're telling the truth or not if you just say yes or no to questions. Likewise, if you give long answers that are a minute long, visa officers only have 3 minutes to interview you. So if they can only ask you 3 questions, that's not going to be enough for them to make a decision. So they're going to be interrupting you and trying to get you to get to the point. So if you don't put the important information right at the beginning, they're going to interrupt you before you even get to it. So I think you should aim for answers to be about 3 to 6 seconds, depending on the complexity of the answer. However, if you aren't able to talk about something and it's the end of the interview, you'll notice that these officers towards the end kind of get quiet and start typing because they're making the notes about to justify the decision they're making. So if there's something very important that you weren't able to talk about up until that point, then this is your chance. So for example, if you think things aren't going very well, but you weren't able to explain that your family has a lot of money to pay for it, then maybe at this time at the end when the officer is quiet, you could say something like, oh, hey, I just also wanted you to know, my father, he's actually a vice president at this company and makes about $200,000 per year. That could be the one piece of information the officer needs to change the decision they're making. And as I mentioned before, like make sure you have all your documents, but don't just pass them over. It happens all the time. A visa officer, there's one random document like your high school transcript they want to see for whatever reason. This is a 1 in a 100 time. But if you don't have it, then it could make the difference between getting approved or denied. So bring them all, but don't be surprised if they ask for nothing. And then finally, I can't stress this enough. Just do not memorize answers. They can't tell if you're lying or not, and it's a reason to refuse you. And then remember, because they're in a hurry, and they are in a bad mood, I'll be honest, they can seem very rude. They're going to interrupt you. They may not smile at you. You may say good morning to them and they'll say nothing back. Don't take that personally, okay? It's not about you. They're just in a hurry. They have to do 120 interviews before lunch. So they're stressed and they're going as fast as they can. But if they're interrupting you, it's not about you. They just want to move on to another question. So just stop talking. Listen carefully for the next question and just kind of stay confident and friendly, even if they are not being friendly. Okay, so you will find out the decision of your interview at the end of the interview itself. A visa officer has to make a decision at the end of that interview. They can either approve your visa and you'll get it back in your passport in a few business days, or they have to refuse you. If they refuse you, they have to do it under a specific section of law. And of course, the most common one is the one you see at the bottom there, 214B, the dreaded 214B. It's so easy for visa officers to refuse cases 214B. They are actually trained that even if everything looks good on paper and you seem okay at interview, but they get a weird feeling from you, like they feel like you're lying, they can refuse you for that reason. 214B means that they think you have immigrant intent, meaning that they think you're going to go to the United States and never return again, or that you don't qualify for a student visa because of money or because they think you're not really going to study. So if they refuse you 214B, it's kind of like game over for that time. You can apply again, but you can't appeal the decision. It's over. Now, the second one is technically a refusal under the law, but it's a temporary refusal. It means they need some other kind of information before they can make a decision. They may want that information from you. So they may tell you specifically what they need from you. Like, hey, I really want to see your university transcripts before I make a decision. Could you please email those to me later today? More commonly, I would say, is what's called administrative processing. This is where they just need to do some additional work on your case. I know a lot of people fear administrative processing. Unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do to prevent it. I just recommend being, honest about everything. Be able to explain very clearly what your research plan is or work background is. If you're explaining some kind of highly technical scientific field that is confusing for a visa officer because their background is in, international relations, usually not science, then if they don't understand what it is that you do, they may assume the worst and get scared. So just make sure you explain what you do in the same way you might explain what you do to a child, make it very clear so that they're making their decisions based from a place of understanding. The good news is, from what I'm hearing, administrative processing these days is, taking just a few weeks. So as long as you apply very early, things would look pretty good for you to get your visa, because the vast majority of 221G administrative processing cases end up being approved when the administrative processing is finished.
Jack,
Okay.
sorry to interrupt. We're at 32.
Oh, okay. I'll go real fast. So if you're reapplying after refusal, sorry. So it's a myth that you have to change your profile. I know everybody thinks I have to change something, my university or my program or whatever. That is not true. What you need to do is provide new information to the second officer that the first officer didn't know. So if you change your university, that's going to look really bad, actually, because it looks like you don't care about what you're doing and they're going to think you're not serious about your studies. Remember also that the second officer can see the first officer's case notes. So make sure everything you say in the second interview is consistent with the first interview. And finally, in the DS-160, there's a question that says, have you been refused a US visa? When you click yes, it says, please explain, and opens up a paragraph box. Use that paragraph to your advantage and explain there that new information that the second officer should know to make a different decision. We talked about this. You do not have to wait 6 months to apply again, especially for a student visa. Just make sure that you have new information to give. You do not have to show 1.5 times the I-20 amount. That's a myth. You just have to show enough for the first year and convince the visa officer you can continue paying for future years. There's no quota. Officers could approve every case in a day or deny every case in a day. And nobody looks at your case until you step into that window. It is not determined until the interview. And officers don't have as much information about you as they think you do. I mean, banks are not going to just like open up their systems to the US government, right? Foreign banks. And if you change your DS-160, an officer could find out that information if they wanted to, but it's not immediately obvious to them. All right, I know this is important for a lot of people. So renewing your F1. If you just got a 1-year F1, which happens sometimes, it's very straightforward to renew because you haven't finished your studies, right? So an officer is going to assume you're kind of just continuing on the path and it should be an easy renewal. If you're renewing a 5-year F1, that's different because most programs are supposed to finish after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So an officer is going to wonder, like, why are you still in the United States after 5 years, right? So make sure you can avoid even being called in for interview by starting out with a really strong DS-160 for your renewal. If you're able to explain in the DS-160 kind of what you're doing with your studies, where it's going, when you intend to leave, how you intend to continue paying, then they may be satisfied just looking at your DS-160 and approve you without calling you in for interview. And that's your best case scenario. So the place you would put that in the DS-160 is it asks, what is your primary education or occupation? You would put student. It says, explain your duties. And that's kind of where you explain where you are in your study process. Remember, officers are looking for progression. So if you started one bachelor's and now you're starting another bachelor's, that's not progression. They want to see you going, bachelor's, master's, PhD. And then they want to know, did you say what you were going to do? Did you apply to go study, engineering at a top school and then suddenly change to doing an English program? That's not going to look good to the officer, and they're going to want to know why you made that change. Remember, that one is for studying, not working. So if you're in the middle of OPT, make sure the officer understands that this is part of your education. You're trying to get some US experience that is very relevant to your studies in order to have a stronger profile when you go back to your home country. And then the officer's curious, like, hey, it's been 5 years. When are you going to leave the United States? Have a credible plan for when you intend to depart and how you intend to continue paying for your study after all these years. Because when they first approved your visa, they thought, hey, okay, looks like he can pay for 2 years. Now it's been 5. How is he or she able to continue paying? Administrative processing, if you had it the first time, it could happen a second time, but it's less likely if you already had it the first time. H-1Bs, really fast. So with H-1Bs, the petition is 90% of this. If your petition is approved, you're in a very good place. And that's because for H-1B visas, an officer cannot refuse you 214B for immigrant intent. It's impossible. So the only way they can refuse you is if they think you lied in your petition, or they think that you are not going to be actually supervised by the petitioner. That is to say, there's somebody petitioning you to the United States and then has you go work for another company and never sees you again. We call that farming you out to another company. Or if they think you're going to be working at somewhere that is not the work site that you put in your petition. So make sure that you know what's in your petition and that everything matches up between what you say in your interview and what's in the petition, and you should be okay. Okay, I know the last couple were very fast. Sorry about that.
All right, that's absolutely great. Let's start with our Q&A session. All right, first one. So this student is a newly admitted law school student, and because of previous issues, I think he or she have back and forth different visas, jumping from F1 to B2 here to F2 here. So he or she is wondering, will there be any particular questions that she'll be expecting during the interview? Because she wanted to go back to China to renew her new F1, to do a new F1.
Okay. This is, very complicated. So 2 years as an F1, then OPT, then B, then to F2, and now wants to go back to F1 again?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. The officer's going to have a lot of questions for you. And like I talked about before, you need to be showing progression, and you need to be able to show when is this going to end. So show how you're moving towards some future goal, and that goal needs to be eventually outside of the United States, especially since your husband's currently there. This is going to look like your only intention is to go reunite with your husband rather than truly study, okay?
Okay, the second one. So this person's undergrad school is under a 143 list. So is an engineer major, and she got a PhD of finance in US. Now working as a assistant professor in the US. So this person already worked 2 years, but didn't renew the F1 yet. So it's the first time that the person is applying for F1B. Is there any risk for premium for administrative processing?
Yeah, there's a risk, but if you remember when that presidential proclamation 10043 was made, a lot of people just had their student visas revoked, yanked, right, in that moment. So the fact that yours was not yanked at that time is a good sign for you. However, yeah, you should be prepared to undergo administrative processing even then.
Mm-hmm. Third one, can I renew my F1 visa while I'm in the US?
No, I mean, you have to go overseas, unless you're talking. Maybe they're talking about like
I think the person is talking about the visa stamp,
like shipping their passport overseas to their home country.
That is very tricky. We don't recommend anything like that.
Okay, yeah, I don't know exactly what that means. Sorry, but I would say no.
So fourth one, I participated in the H-1B lottery but wasn't selected. Does this have anything to do with my F1 renewal interview? Will that have an impact?
No, I don't think so. I think visa officers understand that when you're doing F1 OPT, like it's very natural to try and get an H-1B during that time. As long as the visa officer thinks that you're going to continue abiding by regulations and law and would depart once your OPT status is up, even if you don't have an H-1B at that time, then it should be okay.
Sounds good. Next question, what do I need to watch out or have additional paperwork if I need to prepare for F1 visa interview and I'm going for a second master's degree that I want to do CPT with?
Well, I wouldn't worry so much about paperwork. I'd be worrying about your story. Because remember what I said about one, visa officers want to see progression. And two, visa officers want to see that you truly intend to study rather than work. So a second master's degree is not progression. And day one CPT looks an awful lot like you don't care where you study. You just want to work in the United States, especially if your CPT is in a location that's not where your university is, which happens a lot. So I'll be honest with you, these are going to be some major red flags, and you need to explain why you need to do a second major master's and how the CPT is actually supporting your studies rather than your studies being just an excuse to go do CPT.
Yeah, and this is something we always recommend our students to get to know your universities better and get to know your primary job is to study rather than working. And that's how you're going to tell your stories narrower and, how more smooth and natural in that way. So next question, were prior denied H-1B petition impact H-1B visa stamping or interviews?
I don't know the whole story here, but I'm guessing no, unless there was some kind of fraud involved, which I don't think there would be if your second H-1B petition got approved. Like I said, officers are very limited in being able to refuse an H-1B visa. So assuming everything in your petition is true and you didn't misrepresent yourself previously, it should be okay.
Mm-hmm. Next question, can I travel to renew my F1 visa after STAN OPT ended? And while I'm doing my second master, I think this is kind of the similar questions with the firmer one. So our recommendation is you should always prepare if you ever wanted to get your F1 stamp to get a new F1. So my recommendation is that you go to Jack's website, whether to book a section with him so you can have a plan when you wanted to do the visa stamping interviews, or you can contact our advisors because we have lots of students who have a similar questions or similar problem that they might encounter, and you could discuss that together. So next question, if someone has a arrest record in the US, and will that lead to an automatic rejection during an H-1B visa interview?
No, because like I said before, there's no 214B, so they can't refuse you for that reason. There are refusals for violating the law, but if your case was dismissed, it sounded like those would not apply to you. It is possible that the officer will worry that you have propensities to violence and maybe send you to a physician to be evaluated psychologically. But I think that's kind of the worst case scenario I see for you.
Mm-hmm. Next question, how does the U.S. Embassy process the background check for a visa application?
That I can't talk about. That's kind of classified information. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. So my boyfriend is in America. Is that a red flag for me during an interview, or does the interviewer know?
So it would be a red flag if they knew, but I don't see any reason why they should know, because there's no question on the application that says, do you have a boyfriend in the United States, right? If you're going for a student visa, the most appropriate person to put in your US contact on your DS-160 would be your school official, even if you have a boyfriend there, in my opinion, because this is what your travel is for, is to go study, right? So I don't see any reason why they should know about this unless they ask you directly. And if they do, then of course you don't lie. You tell them about the boyfriend, but they usually wouldn't ask that question.
Next question. I think a lot of students are curious. Is there any red flag university list for visa interviewers that they look into?
You're wondering if like there's a list of problem universities that officers...
Yeah.
Oh, no. The State Department, who runs like the US embassies overseas, is very clear that anybody who has an I-20 can get a student visa. You should not deny people just based on universities. However, you know, if 10 people show up at that window at this university and they all have problems, then the visa officer is going to start to sense a pattern. And even if it's unconscious, then it could affect your case. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's no list. No.
Okay. So next question, is it more difficult for a person with many years of work experience and older to get an F1 visa? And is there a special factor to take care of?
Yeah, I would say it's a little more difficult. One reason it's more difficult is a lot of time 40-year-olds might have a spouse and children, which, you know, visa officers get worried about F2s because it really adds to the cost. But beyond that, you need to just explain why you're making a sudden change in your life, or why didn't you do this, you know, when you were in your 30s. But I see 40-year-olds get approved for master's programs with some frequency. So especially if you have a strong financial profile.
All right, next one. I work in the US on H-1B for a couple of years, and I never went back to China. But now I'm pursuing my third master and go back on F1. So my husband is on H-1B and starting to apply for a green card. What are something that I need to pay attention to?
Well, you're in a better situation just because if your F1 falls through, of course, you can always get an H4, and your H4 is pretty much guaranteed as long as your relationship is valid. So at least you have that to fall back on. But I would say the number one reason is have a good explanation for why you want the F1 rather than the H4. As you know, there are some universities that won't allow you to study on an H4. I think the more common reason is that you probably want to do some kind of CPT or OPT, I'm guessing. And if that's the case, it's okay, but you need to explain clearly kind of what your family's long-term plan is too, especially regarding your green card. Just make sure that the officer knows that you two understand how the green card process works and how you can have two intents at the same time. You can have an intent currently for a temporary stay, while at the same time having a long-term intent to immigrate. That is actually allowed, as long as you can explain clearly that you know the process to do that.
Yeah, so next person, I believe the person hasn't overstayed, and his or her SEVIS number has been changed in a short amount of time. Will this affect negatively on visa interviews? What is the things that he or she should look out for?
By when they say SEVIS number has changed, I mean they changed universities.
Yes, and I do believe there's a gap between changing the SEVIS. That's why it is causing some overstays.
Okay, I think I understand. Yeah, so the officer is going to wonder, like, why did you not do what you told us you were going to do in the beginning? And if you changed your university immediately upon entering the United States or very quickly after, they're going to think that you lied at your previous interview about what your intentions were, and your intention was to change the university the whole time. The 2-month gap is problematic, but there's no kind of hard ineligibility. I mean, they cannot refuse you for an overstay because it was only 2 months and you were on student status. But they are going to want to know, like, what happened there? Why were you have this 2-month gap? And you better have a clear plan for, like, in the future, how you're going to not do something like that again. And I would maybe focus if you had a good GPA before this happened, that could be something to focus on.
All right. So the next question, this person wanted to renew the F1 during OPT, but the person has worked during CPT and OPT, all that. So will a visa interviewer likely to ask a particular questions for this kinds of situations?
So right now they're currently doing OPT?
Yes,
yeah.
I believe.
Okay. Yeah. So a visa officer, they probably won't know about your CPT. And it's pretty common, to do OPT and to have people renewing during their OPT time, as long as, I'm guessing you must have done a bachelor's degree. Is that possible? Or why would they be renewing? I'm not sure, but as long as the officer thinks that you have a credible plan for finishing out your OPT and then departing the United States, then you should be okay.
All right. Next question. What does an F1 visa checking process do? So basically administrative processing.
Administrative processing could mean a million different things. It could be random. It could be based on something. So I can't really answer that question. Some of the reasons are classified that I can't talk about. All you can do is just be clear with an officer, make sure they understand everything about you, your job, what your research is, and you have all the documentation that they might request regarding this. And it shouldn't take too long.
All right. Next person is actually under administrative processing right now. So is it good to contact a lawyer to directly contact the consulate for the person?
So you may bring up a good point. Sometimes administrative processing takes a really long time. Not the majority of cases, but it can. So the time when you bring in a lawyer is only when it has been what is called an unreasonable amount of time. That's kind of the only time that a lawyer could intervene. And there's no definition of what an unreasonable amount of time is. You probably want to talk to a lawyer and see what kind of cases they're getting approved from a judge to speed things along. But it's not going to be like a few weeks or a couple months. It'd have to be a lot longer than that. And if it's before that amount of time, there's really not anything you can do other than wait, unfortunately.
Next question. So this is similar to the other questions that we talked about. So this person.
Oh, sorry. Could I just interrupt you real quick, Ryan? Yeah. Just to stress too, I am not a lawyer. I cannot offer immigration advice. This is just kind of my view as a visa officer, but really you should talk to a lawyer if it's anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Today we're only for the visa interviews. If you have any immigration advice, we're not here for that. But we do have other sessions we welcome every student to attend. But if you have any particular visa interview questions, feel free to contact Jack or contact us. We're able, we hope we could help you with that. So this person had an F1 and then H1B and then F1 again. And also, the person is anxious about the interview because H1B allows dual intent. So will he be questions on his intent of going back after studying?
Sorry, he already has a second F1?
Yes, I think he's transferring from H1B to F1. So he want to get a F1.
Oh, so he changed status in the United States to F1?
Yes.
Okay. Oh. I'm not sure where the dual intent comes into this because he's not in H1B status. He's in F1 status, is I understand it. But renewing an F1 after you've already had a previous F1 and an H1B could be problematic for you because an officer's thinking your true intention is just you want to stay in the United States rather than really study. So what would help is if your university is high quality and you're able to talk about why, because people do Fs in order for some future goal, right? So you need to be able to talk about why you're doing this F, how it's going to benefit you in the future, so it doesn't sound like you're just staying in the US to stay in the US.
Okay, next question. Sorry, I jumped a little bit. So would I get denied for renewing my F1 if my petitioner of EB5 immigration process is at a certain point? I don't know if this is something that under your, area of expertise, but
if well, you're basically telling the visa officer, I want to immigrate to the United States and asking for a non-immigrant visa. And this kind of case can get approved. And like I kind of talked about previously, the key here is that the officer needs to know that you understand that you know the process for the EB-5, that you would depart the United States and apply for it in an overseas embassy. And in the meantime, you want to do this F1 for some very specific real reason that's going to get you somewhere. I can't imagine what that would be if you have an EB-5 pending, but you better tell a good story of why this makes sense in your life right now, the F1.
Yes. For this kinds of situations, we really highly recommend you to consult with somebody who has an experience, who's professional in this field. You could always scan the QR code and we can refer you to Jack, maybe talk to Jack about this and he can prepare you for the interview. And next question. So, I have a questions about renewing my F1 student visa. My first F1 was already expired. Do you think the officer will ask the same questions when I first, have my F1, or what's the point of officer would try to figure out from my answers?
Right. So assuming this was a 5-year visa, that means you've now been in the US for 8 years. I'm guessing when you had your interview in 2015, you didn't say you were going to be in the US for 8 years. So it's going to be a different kind of interview. It's possible they'll renew your visa without calling you in, but if they do, they're going to want to know, how are you still able to pay? Are you progressing in your academic career? And at what point are you going to depart the United States?
Absolutely. Next question. I'm already using STEM OPT. So will this be considered a red flag? So
they are renewing an F1, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Not necessarily. No, it's very common to do this. Again, this kind of calls into mind like the 5-year, I don't know how long you've been in the United States, but assuming you have been maintaining status and have an end point and a plan for the future, I don't see it necessarily being a problem, no.
Mm-hmm. Does a visa interviewer see if a company sponsors my H-1B or my H-1B history?
I don't know if I can answer that specifically, but just know that the US government, the different branches do talk to each other. So the safest thing is to always assume that the visa officer can see other government processes you've gone through, even if it's with DHS or USCIS.
Mm-hmm. Next one was also long. So I was an exchange student 5 years ago with F1, and I applied for a B1 visa last year and spent 4 months in Texas for a business trip. And I have a Chinese master's degree. So what is suggestions for a new, I believe, F1 interview?
Yeah, this looks very suspicious if I were a visa officer, because a 4-month stay quickly followed by a student visa is going to make me worry that your true reason for going to the United States isn't to study, but rather to do something with this Texas-based company. I don't know what your relationship was, if it was a client of yours or a sister company or what, but I would immediately assume that you were maybe working during those 4 months in Texas, depending on the circumstances, and that your master's degree was for you to continue doing the same.
So this person wanted to know how likely is a officer gonna, reject people after they have done their CPTs and OPT. I think this doesn't really have a definition or doesn't really have a percentages of rejections, but this person also wanted to know that if I live far away from the universities before and I wanted to do a visa interview, what are the tips?
This is this is a big red flag for a visa officer. This really makes it look like you only care about working rather than studying, right? If you're not even living in the same city where your university is. Now, like I said, visa officers are in a hurry and they go very quickly. So it's possible that they just won't even notice it. So if I were you, I wouldn't highlight this fact unless asked directly. But really all you can hope to do is get lucky and kind of stress the academic side of what you're doing. So even if they're online classes or you're only going there a couple times per semester, kind of focus on that coursework rather than just focusing on the CPT you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So next question. So for students who have more than one master's degree in the US, would the officers has questions about why are you doing the second master? And especially when the first I-20 was issued, to a very great university, and then you are transferred to a, I don't know, less ranked university or something like that?
Okay, this is very common. I guess a lot of people are doing second masters out there. You're right. It definitely helps your case if you were approved to a very high quality university, because like I said, officers can't keep lists of schools or anything, but if you're admitted to a high quality university, it gets rid of all of their doubts about you trying not being a quality student, because the university has such a selective application process. They immediately just have a lot of information about you being a good student, right? So that does look good for you. And you mentioned here that your second master's is definitely related to your job duties, and the reason for studying is for career growth. That's the key. So you kind of honed in what you need to stress, just be able to explain why a second master's makes sense for you and for your future goals.
All right, and I think we have already answered this one previously. So for it is already 6:29, so we're gonna answer the last question for you guys. And why going to a cuisines company or reuniting with family is a red flag? I don't know. I'm not sure what
maybe cousin.
Maybe a cousin's company.
Yeah, maybe this person misunderstood what I said. I don't know exactly what. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. So maybe you're talking about, I said, if you had a family member who had a house painting business, you're not allowed to work in the United States on an F1 visa for your cousin's house painting business, right? So if the officer thinks that that's what you intend to do, they're going to deny your student visa. Or if your mom is in the United States, they're going to wonder, hey, do you actually want to go study in the United States, or do you just want to go be with your mother? And that's why those are red flags.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we do want to suggest that even though is like a commonly red flag, you still have ways to explain yourself. You still have possibility
absolutely
pass the visa interviews. That's when you need professional help, or you need to prepare for your interview by yourself, but you need to take a lot of effort to do so. We don't want you to just go into the visa interview without preparation at all. So if you have any kinds of needs for going to a visa interview help, you can always scan the QR code. We can connect you with Jack, and Jack might provide to your particular cases, provide some assistance to you so that you have a better chances to pass your visa interview. And I do want to thank everybody for coming today. And I think, Jack, you did an excellent job presenting and answering all of these questions. We had a lot of questions to answer today, and we really look forward to having you on again.
This was so much fun. Thank you very much for inviting me, Ryan. I know I talk really fast, so I'm sorry about that. Hopefully the slides were able to help people understand.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Yeah, nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.